following will be a talk by Donald S. Kennedy, Chairman of the Board of the Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company, before the Newcomen Society of Oklahoma in May 1972.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for all being here. We are assembled here tonight to hear the success story of the Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company. Now, this story will be told by a man who knows more about it than anyone else. This story will be told by a man who has contributed more than anyone else to the success of the OG&E. You'll learn from my speaker why this is a great company. I'm sure it goes without saying that great companies are the results of hard work, innovation, and the integrity of great men. The OG&E has been blessed with many great men through the years, but none equals that of our speaker tonight. He came to Oklahoma by way of Indiana. He attended Butler and Arizona universities. He married Gertrude Hacker in 1927. And the two went to work to carve a great company in this great state of ours. Our speaker has served in every important job that goes to make a community a good place in which to work, a good place in which to live. He has served his church, his city, and his state, and his nation. In the electric utility industry, he has contributed as much or more than any single person, not only in the state, and not only in the nation, but internationally. He has seen the industry grow from the reciprocating, steam-driven generators to the now nuclear plants. And it is most appropriate, I think, that the perfect analogy of the atom and his company can be made. A successful company is like an atom, a strong positive nucleus surrounded by concentric spherical spheres, the whole of which contains a tremendous amount of power. Certainly as far as the Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company is concerned, and to a large degree the entire electrical industry in the world, our speaker has been a great nucleus about which many people have rotated, receiving inspiration, guidance, and leadership, forming an atom out of which much electricity has been produced. His name is Donald S. Kennedy, and Don, this is your welcome.
Members of the Newcomen Society, Bill, Wayne, Dean, E.K., and guests. I'm sure you know I didn't write that. I wouldn't have had that much nerve. Although since Bill brought up this matter about the Sunday school class, I suppose I have to finish it. I have a real complex about speaking on account of him, to tell the truth. Now here's what really happened. The class had a man who became governor, another man who was in the legislature and now running for Senate, you could probably guess who, and a district judge, and Bill. And we had about 30 members of the class, but one Sunday, Bill and I were the only ones there. So I said, Bill, I don't believe we're doing very well in this. And he said, I don't know about you, but this is my last Sunday. So you can see why I hate to speak in front of him. That almost ruined my whole life. But I am very pleased to suggest again that I didn't write that introduction of Wayne's, though I certainly do appreciate it. He could have said, although it wouldn't have been the truth, that I graduated cum laude. He could have said that I was in the top 3/4 of my class, and that would have been the truth. But he didn't say either one, which I really appreciate. So I know that this complex I have with Bill is going to stay with me all my life, and I'm sure you know that at this society you always receive a booklet which gives my speech. As a matter of fact, probably you can't recognize it when I get through anyway, so you better take the booklets home with you, and or wherever they are. Where are they, by the way? They'll be given out. Oh, that's a good thing, because I wouldn't want anyone to try to follow my remarks with the booklet. But we really are here tonight to hear the story of the OG&E, and it would be very presumptuous on my part to suggest that I could assume much responsibility for all these things that have happened over the 70 years. I've been around it almost 50, so you see it's quite a long time. And I'm sure that you realize that many things happen in a company this size that have to be attributed to the 2,700 and how many, 85? I thought we only had 2,780 employees. They have to be attributed to the efforts of all, and we try to say that our company is rather a family thing, and everybody knows everyone by the first name, and we used to know that. And a while back I had an investment banker here from New York that I wanted to have buy some of our securities, and so I gave him this speech about we're just one big family and everybody knows each other. And so I told him I would take him down to our new Seminole generating station near Kanawha. And so I drove up to the gate, and this guard was there, and I said, "I'm Don Kennedy. I have a guest. I want to show the plant." And he said, "Don Kennedy, I don't believe I've ever heard of you." So you can see I had a little trouble with my friend from New York trying to explain this was a new employee we hadn't met yet, but it didn't go over very well. In any event, throughout our history of 70 years, it's been very turbulent at times. It sort of parallels E.K. Gaylord's time around Oklahoma, but we always had a motto of pioneers in public service. Though we don't use that motto so much anymore, we like to think of ourselves as pioneers. And so we have listed a few of the pioneering firsts of our company that I thought might be of interest to you. In 1928, the OG&E became the first investor-owned electric company to develop performance data on natural lake cooling. Now that's very important in ecology now, and the other day when this report was put out about our company, they said we were doing very well on ecological matters with cooling water, but it was because we didn't know any better and we did it accidentally. But anyway, in 1928 we started that. In 1935 we used recarbonization process to cut down on the circulating water scale. So those two things are really first in our company. We didn't do much for a little while, and then we developed a combination of gas turbines and generators. In fact, I think we were the first one to have a gas turbine connected to a steam generator. And then we moved on to a very important effort on one of our engineers' part on three-phase and single-phase service for residential service. I won't go into that except to say that it saved our company and every company in the United States millions of dollars in investment. And then in 1963 we established our first big combined cycle generating station at Hera, which was at that time the first one in the United States of any size. More recently, we pioneered an important development in undergrounding of distribution service to residential services in all new places where the homeowner and the builder don't have to pay for it, but we do. And in any new addition, we're putting the services underground for them. And there are many other instances of our attitude on pioneering. We've been willing to take chances on some of these things, and I think we have often been leaders. Our company, I might go back a little bit now and say, started in 1902. Not many of you were around here then, but that was before statehood, of course, as you might recall. And the company was formed very interestingly. We thought we were going to have hydro electricity in Oklahoma City. So we dug a ditch out here to come down to Noble Street, and we thought that would produce electricity, or at least the people in those days did. And I don't know if you remember that, E.K., or not, but the ditch was quite interesting. It had a very short history. It lasted one night, but as a matter of fact, it was a real disappointment. It had it was 32 feet wide, 10 feet deep, and had a 6-mile flow and a fall of 32 feet. The only thing is the engineers that designed it didn't know about the sand of the Canadian River, and the water all disappeared before it got down to turn the wheels. But there was a little flash of light on Saturday night, but it was very short. It lasted a very short time, and that was the end of it. Well, they tried to pave the ditch, but it didn't work either, and so we had to give that up. And so the people who had put their money in naturally went broke, and so they started out. Oklahoma City then had about 4,500 population. Next 4 years were very discouraging in Oklahoma City because people moved in and out. According to the record, most of these merchants, we would have to collect their bill in advance because they only stayed in business about a month as a rule. And we one time tried to attach some barrels of beer to pay a bill, but something happened to the beer. I never found out exactly what. That doesn't show in our history. But anyway, things like that were pretty difficult. We had 250 horsepower of generating equipment, so you can realize how small that amounted to. And from 1896 to 1902, we had the same problems, only more so, because people away from here decided that was a very short boom in Oklahoma City and that people would never move here, and so it was difficult to raise any capital to continue the company. Various people invested in it, some from Denver, some from St. Louis, some from Boston. All of them lost their money. But in 1910, we started doing quite good deal better. It's rather interesting. I might mention about this because the two people that owned the company put their stock up with Mr. Ames and Dennis Flynn as collateral for a loan. They couldn't pay the loan, so Mr. Ames and Dennis Flynn got the OG&E. But they didn't really want it, especially Mr. Flynn, because I talked to him about this once years later, and he said, that's the worst business I was ever in. He said, to take in $1, you have to invest $4 or $5, and you never get to take any money out of it. And he said, as soon as I could, I gave it away. So you see, we had a pretty hard time for quite a while. But by 1910, the population of Oklahoma City had increased to 61,000. And I might go back here, which is very interesting, because in 1908, as you may remember, that's 1 year after statehood, we started paying cash dividends on our common stock, and we have paid them uninterruptedly ever since. I couldn't even make that. If we were in registration, I couldn't even say that because it would look like I'm trying to promote the company, which of course I am. Well, anyway, in February 1902, going back one more time to when we started, we received a franchise from the city of Oklahoma City, which established the electric rate of 20 cents per kilowatt hour for residential service. That's about 1/7 what it is now. Because of this franchise, we were able to borrow $300,000 in New York and Boston, but we had to use almost all of that money because we were building a gas plant. You see, we were still using artificial or manufactured gas in those days, and so we had quite a bit of expenditure for that. I might add that we were, at that particular time, I looked up our bank balance, and it was $62.67. And so you can see we were in sort of a close situation. We put in some gas meters that you had to put in a quarter to get your gas. You would get a quarter's worth of gas, and as soon as that ran out, you have to put in another quarter. And we were so hard up then that every Friday we would apparently have to go out and, they call them robbing the meters, and rob the meters for the payroll on Saturday. But anyway, we kept going and paid the dividends. I can understand how they possibly could have done it, and I'm sure they weren't earned sometimes. But In any case, Dennis Flynn, as you might remember, was Streeter Flynn, our longtime director's father. Streeter had some of the same ideas as his father about spending money, I might add. But shouldn't speak of him that way, I guess, now. But anyway, he and I were very great friends. Well, I'll pass on to the next thing that happened. By that time, we were getting our generating capacity up. It was 700 kilowatts. And then we went on, and by the end of 1909, we had 4,000 kilowatts in a generating station on Noble Street. You may remember that down on Broadway. And so we went forward for quite a while, but we had a good deal of trouble showing investors that Oklahoma was a permanent place they could make investments. And so we had quite a few changes in who the leaders were of the company in those years. But for quite a while then, residential customers would only use a very small amount each month. And our company, of course, needed to build up the usage, and I think they started a rumor that if you would put your electric iron on the meter wouldn't run so fast. So the meters were all in the house. Now, I don't know whether that was really done, but it seems a little unorthodox. But we wanted to sell electric irons, and that really did get them sold. The only trouble was, the bad part really was, that the meter readers, with the meters in the house, when they came around to read the meters, the housewives had to keep the door locked till they took the iron off of the top of the meter. And of course that slowed them down a lot. Well, anyway, this is a great sales effort in regard to electric irons. So we moved on then, and finally we started our transmission system, which first of all went to El Reno and then later to Norman. Our interconnected system, of course, now is quite extensive. I might say one thing about it just very briefly. A few years ago, we had hired some football players. I hope there's nobody here from OU except Dr. Sharp and a few more. We hired this football player from OU to work in the summer. He was a great fullback, but he wasn't too bright, and so he dropped a piece of steel behind our switchboard at the Hera plant. It didn't affect our service, but it put New Orleans in the dark. And we didn't like to explain to them what happened, so we never did. But I went to the Sugar Bowl game that year, and Louisiana was playing Oklahoma. And I sat by the president of New Orleans Public Service, and he said, "Your fullback is really putting our lights out." So I think I should get some credit. I didn't say anything except, "You don't know what you're saying." But anyway, he put them in the dark briefly. In 1924, J.F. Owens became the chief executive of our company, and he was the chief executive officer until about 1942. I'm sure many of you remember him. We started growing quite a bit in those days. We built a plant at called Riverbank at Muskogee, and we built a plant at Hera. With these two plants had a capacity of 37,500 kilowatts, which, considering we were used to 250 and 1,000, that was a very great advance. Then we began to serve a number of additional communities. I might mention a few of those: Muskogee, Sapulpa, Ardmore, Ada, Durant, Shawnee, Holdenville, and Seminole. And so then we moved forward. The growth then was fairly steady for a while. In 1920, though, our sales were just 2,600,000. It was a little bit after that I started working with the company, and I guess now I can say our sales this year will be about 160 million. So to go from 2,600,000 to 160 is quite a change. Of course, our number of customers greatly increased over that period, but the customers didn't increase nearly as rapidly as did the load on our system. So anyway, I came with the company. I guess I won't go about my degree anymore, but I did graduate, and as a matter of fact, in those days they didn't have anybody recruiting, like they do now, to go around and see if you can hire someone to come to work. And I wrote several companies letters, and the only one that answered my letter was Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company, so naturally I took the job. I never had been in Oklahoma before, and I didn't know anything about it, but that was the only offer I had, so I took it. But shortly after that, as I might have mentioned, we were in the ice business. And so, among other jobs I had, I was supposed to look after our ice plants. I didn't learn much about that, although it was interesting, and I did find out from the drivers how you could take 100 pounds of ice and cut it into 3 50-pound pieces. That's a fairly interesting procedure. But the company never did get the benefit of any of that is the trouble. And I was supposed to know about economics and accounting, and you can see I couldn't use either one of those capabilities in that regard. But it was interesting to develop the depreciation rates for mules and various things. And we had one mule in particular that had worked so hard we thought we'd retire it, so we put it out in the pasture, and it just kept walking along. About every 100 feet it would stop like it was delivering ice, and it'd walk and wouldn't even eat. So we finally had to put it back to work. I think that'd be good for some of our retirees now, but you may wonder, by now we'd gotten down to where we decided to sell our gas business. That was 1928, and you wonder why we never did change our name. Maybe you wonder why we sold the gas business. My feeling about it was there wasn't any future in it, and maybe I was right, but I was a few years ahead of time. Well, anyway, we continue to call ourselves OG&E Electric Service Company, and that isn't unusual. Several other companies continue to do that, though they don't sell gas. Well, anyway, about this time, the Depression came along, and our sales went down very rapidly, and along with everybody else's, and it was a very difficult time. We had to reduce our expenses and reduce our personnel. It was really very difficult. Just before the Depression, however, we finished our building in Oklahoma City. At that time, it was 6 stories. It's taller than that now, as you may notice if you go out there. And we did continue our expansion, though, even though times got a little bit difficult. We purchased the electric business in Fort Smith, Van Buren, and a number of towns in Arkansas through the acquisition of a company called the Missouri Valley Power Company, also the Fort Smith Light and Traction Company. Well, I'm glad we got rid of the traction. We did better on that than we did on the ice. But anyway, we have a picture in the book. When you get it, I want you to be sure and look at our equipment we had at Fort Smith in the early 1900s. It's a mule hitched to a wagon putting new carbons in the street light. You're all too young to remember when street lights had to have carbons in them. But anyway, we, in about that period too, decided we should serve rural customers. And though you read in the paper, you'd think we never thought of that. We have, I suppose, now around 40,000 rural and farm customers. There's a question anymore what a farm customer is, so I won't try to be very definitive about how many we have, but I think we have around 40,000. But in that same period, we had just finished 2 other plants, one near Ponca City, and also we built the plant at Belle Isle. And so we had a generating capacity which had picked up quite a bit in the period. But we continued to build transmission lines, and by that time, right in the Depression, we should have built a lot more. Things were so cheap then, but we had about 5,000 miles of transmission at that time, and we were serving 192 cities, and had a number of other wholesale towns. We served about 42 more, so we were serving 234 cities and towns. Then we did purchase the business in Woodward. I'm glad of that because that gave us an outlet to go quail hunting. In fact, that's one of the best things about it up to now, I think. But because we bought it just before the tornado, I think you'd remember how difficult that was when the tornado struck at Woodward, and more than 100 people were killed. One of our employees in the plant was killed, and our plant there was destroyed. We had planned for disasters, but we never planned for one quite this magnitude. But we had arranged, in case of disaster, to send workers and food and everything so the people could live up there and work. And so 3 days after our distribution system was almost entirely destroyed at Woodward, we had the service restored in that area. Everyone who was in the company about worked on what happened, and so we managed to survive the tornado, although we just ended up with a whole new system in that area. In 1949, George Davis, who had been president since 1942, retired, and I had the opportunity to become president and chairman of the board. So we went forward from there with more generating plants. I will not detail all those, although in 1953 we built our first outdoor generating station, which near Sulphur, which we call the Arbuckle plant. And so then we started getting bigger units, 100,000 kilowatt units, and moved on the next year in 1956, 185,000. All these things seem almost unreal now when you think about the small beginning we had when we were using 250 horsepower, and then we put in 185,000 kilowatt unit at Muskogee and made a line of 161,000 volts, whereas 24,000 had been the highest we'd ever thought of. And now we have 500,000 volt lines. And so on Oklahoma Semi-Centennial 1957, we started Mustang 4, which would be our biggest unit. It was 273,000 kilowatts. And then we put in Horseshoe Lake 7, 245,000, and moved on from there. By 1960, we had connected our 50,000th electric range. A couple of years later, we were 64,000 in electric ranges. I guess there's nobody here from the gas company. They probably write these figures all down. But anyway, we kept on working, and our customers then got up to 356,000. This year, there's something like 466,000. So you see this growth, for which hardly any of us can take credit except to say that we grew with the area, and we had to always keep ahead of the growth. And I'm very proud to say that we never have had any brownouts, blackouts, or anything else, and we don't expect to have any, absent a real disaster, which I don't believe is likely to happen. One thing I might say about our situation along about then was very serious too. We didn't have a good safety record, and we knew that Oklahoma workmen were just as good as any in the United States, and we started to devote a very great effort to safety. As a matter of fact, we had a real impetus to it, and since the man is here from Fred S. James, our insurance carrier, at least then, we had 8 fatal accidents, and so in 1 year, and so 2 employees I better add. So we had just borrowed quite a bit of money in New York, I think, well, quite a bit for then, $10 million, and one of the things about our agreement to borrow the money was we'd maintain the same insurance that we had. And I was in New York and signed these papers and came home. I didn't pay attention to that fine print about maintaining everything like it was. And one of the causes was we had to keep the same insurance. But when I got home, we had a notice from the insurance carrier they're going to cancel our policy because we'd killed 8 employees in 1 year. Well, so we had to do quite a bit of pleading with them to say we're going to do better. We knew we could, and we certainly did. And since that time, we've won the National Safety Award, or been either first or second on the last several occasions. The last 3 or 4 years, we have had a very wonderful record. We've led our industry group and have done quite well. Well, in any case, of course, about that time, we started with computers. I don't believe I better go into that, but we started using computers for accounting and for some engineering problems. And ever since then, we have moved forward with quite a bit of speed on these computers. I don't know if they do what they say they do or not, but they make quite a bit of noise and generate a good deal of heat, and some things come out. But I will say that you can't tell. We had some proxy the other day where they got the man's address mixed up with his account number, and he wrote me a letter and he said, "Please wake up your clerks," or words to that effect. Well, anyway, Then about this time, the more interesting thing to most of you might be the fact that we built this heavy line in connection with some other electric companies in the Southwest, the Public Service of Oklahoma in particular, and 11 companies altogether to interconnect our Southwest region with the Tennessee Valley Authority. This line is 500,000 volts through Arkansas and 345,000 to Oklahoma City, and then we have another line south from Oklahoma City to Shreveport, 345,000. Well, in any event, in the TVA area, they have a great deal of electric heating load, and we have, in this area, a great deal of cooling. And so we made an exchange, the biggest one ever made in the United States up to that time, 1.5 million kilowatts that our company furnished 345,000 of that. And so we exchanged that power summer and winter, and it's a very great saving to them and to us as well. And to our customers, it saves that big an investment and has been very successful. Of course, as a matter of fact, and sorry Bob Kerr isn't here, because I'd like to say that we would have never been able to make that contract except for Senator Kerr, because the Tennessee Valley felt that our power was poisonous, and they wouldn't even talk to us. But after Senator Kerr spoke to them, they came over to see us right away, and we appreciate that very great help, and the whole thing has been beneficial to both parties of the contract. But anyway, in we better move on. Do you all have anything else to do? I'm really not very busy, and I could run on quite a while here, but we better hurry up and get through. In 1962, that was our 60th anniversary, we announced a huge construction budget, I'll quote huge, of $19 million. This year it's $69 million, and the next 3 years we expect, including this year, expect to be $250 million. Of course, in these times of big figures, that doesn't sound like much, but actually, maybe the best way I could describe it is that when I was first executive officer, our total investment was $60 million. And so now we're doing the same thing every year that we did in the first about 40 years of our company. We're spending about as much as we had invested after 40 years of business. Now we're spending that much every year. That is assuming we can continue to interest people in investing in our company. Otherwise, we won't have it to spend. But anyway, I think it's important to suggest that we also have worked very diligently on industrial development over the years and have had a certain amount of success in some of the plants that have come to Oklahoma, and we certainly intend to continue that. I'll go on to talk briefly about our new station, Seminole, near Kanawha. This station was begun actually about 1965, although in 1968, before we broke ground, we constructed a lake there, and our first unit there is a 550,000 kilowatt unit. And before that was in service, which it actually went in service in early 71, we decided to put in 2 more units that same size to make that station the largest one on our system. Unit number 2 is scheduled for operation in 1973, and unit number 3 in 1975 to make that station 1,650,000 kilowatts capacity. And this will almost double our capacity when Seminole 1 went into operation. I think you all realize that you can't store electricity, and we have to have these machines ready and the investment made. Whenever anyone pushes a switch, we have to be ready. And so we went ahead with the plans for that, and just about last month, we announced that we expect to spend $100 million at Muskogee on 2 more 550 kilowatt units to be installed in our Riverbank station there. At our Kanawha location, we have a lake and very fine water, and we have boat ramps and have water skiing, and everything is open to the public for picnicking and fishing. The best fishing, it's very interesting to mention, is right near the outlet where the water's warm. Many ecologists think that ruins fishing, but that isn't true at all. And if you can work somebody to fish near the outlets, you can catch all you can carry home. I wouldn't recommend you all go at once, though, because there isn't very much room there. But anyway, we think this, the thing that we can coexist with ecology and generating of power is real important. And I suppose I might say one thing about our relations with our customers. I'm sure you know that we have a great deal of jurisdiction, like the Federal Power Commission, the Corporation Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and all these new ones, OEO, and I won't try to name them all, but over the years I think we've had satisfactory relationships with all of those various commissions. And I think we've had those too with our customers, because in the last 25 years, I'm sure you may recall that in Oklahoma, a franchise can only be for a limited period. That is, for 25 years is the maximum. And in the elections we've had in the last few years, 218 franchise elections, 95.7% of the people have voted to renew our franchise. I think this speaks more than I can say about our relations with our customers. Well, in any event, I think this is getting near the close. I know you will be pleased, but I might mention one more group of figures because they're so impressive, at least to me. In 1931, we made 458 million kilowatt hours. You can't remember all these. In 1951, we made 1.5 billion kilowatt hours. In 61, 3.5 billion, and last year, 10.7 billion kilowatt hours. So you see, if you go back to 31, in this 40-year period, we have generated almost 30 times as much power last year as we did in that period a few years ago. And I might say one other thing about our investment. Our investment, which, as I suggested when I was first executive officer, was about 60 million. It's now around 700 million. And that money had to come mostly from people that had confidence in Oklahoma and in us. And of course, we're proud that we were able to finance these very great expansions. And I suppose I could close. I better read this last paragraph. They're going to be mad at me about the whole deal on account of this book. I haven't read anything yet, but what about the future? All indicators seem to point toward an even more rapid change in the next few years, even more challenges than we have faced in the past. But I have faith in the American economy, in the profit and loss system, and in the pioneering spirit of OG&E. I believe we will continue to meet these challenges and turn them into opportunities. I believe we will continue to be good neighbors to man and nature, and that electricity will gain an even larger role in making our environment more livable and keeping it that way. Thank you.